Merci beaucoup, Madame Ofkir. Ma présentation sera en anglais, mais je voudrais en premier lieu remercier la faculté de droit et d'économie de l'Université de La Réunion et le centre d'études de droit et management de l'océan Indien. Et je voudrais remercier les organisateurs de la conférence, qui est une opportunité de faire des échanges. J'ai beaucoup appris durant ces 2 jours. Et je remercie à l'audience aussi pour les contributions très riches pour l'agenda de l'intégration régionale et les accords de partenariat économique. C'est dommage, nous sommes presque à la fin et la plupart des participants y sont déjà partis. Mais avant ma présentation, je voudrais d'abord reconnaître certaines présentations qui ont été faites par des intervenants, notamment Madame Magali Lachumani. Hier, elle a bien fait une présentation sur les configurations régionales, et je dois aussi reconnaître l'intervention de Madame Pamina Kone sur la situation de Brexit. Je dois aussi reconnaître l'intervention ce matin de M. Bruno Milio, qui fait partie des conseillers du commerce extérieur de la France, qui était vraiment une présentation pratique avec des problèmes bien identifiés. Et mes collègues, professeur Rajendra Ganput et Madame Trudy, sur les interventions qu'ils ont faites. Tout cela m'a obligé de revoir ma présentation. J'ai dû tirer certaines parties pour éviter la répétition. Je sais que la répétition, c'est la mère de savoir, mais à ce moment, je pense qu'on n'a pas besoin de répéter tout ce qu'on a dit. Donc, je vais directement au point. My presentation is titled The Impact of the European Union Economic Partnership Agreements on the African Regional Integration Agenda, a time for reality check in the Eastern and Southern African region. This title was inspired by the fact that we have been almost 2 decades into these EPA negotiations between the EU and the ACP countries. And I think we need to draw lessons from the past experiences from Lomé, Cotonou, Yaoundé, and also during all these decades of negotiations. But my suggestion is that we should move ahead. Unfortunately, the representative of the Union, the European Union in the region has left, but I thought maybe we should recommend that the European Union should just start moving into the future, because there are some challenges which have been identified during all these negotiations. There are emerging issues which need to be tackled, and my impression is that we should turn our eyes to the future. My presentation outline will just go through an introduction, and then I will go through the landscape of regional integration in Eastern and Southern Africa. This is where I had to remove part of the slides to avoid repetition. Then the importance of EPAs for the Eastern and Southern African economies. And then I will go into the mapping of the gaps in the EPAs for African development. And then the last chapter before conclusion will be the harnessing of the EPA's benefits for deeper regional integration in the Eastern and Southern African region. First, let me just quote the ACP Secretary General. According to him, it has become quite clear from our frank discussions that the 2 years of regional negotiations have generated very little tangible outputs, particularly as related to the 2 areas of critical interest to the ACP regions and countries, namely the development dimension of EPAs and the support for regional integration processes. This basically summarizes my presentation. And I have to recognize that Mr. Bruno has summarized also this morning. The negotiations have failed in terms of support for development and the support for regional integration processes. There is also the declaration, the Khartoum Declaration, which was issued at the end of the 5th Summit of ACP Heads of State and Government. The concern was that the EPAs must grant an appropriate degree, timing, and pacing of market opening for the ACP states. This is necessary to attenuate the costs of liberalization that would otherwise be substantial given the level of current tariff importance of the EU as a major trading partner and the significance of tariffs as a source of government revenue and instrument for industrial development for many of the ACP states. And I think our colleague from the Chamber of Commerce, France, Madagascar, had raised that issue of the government revenue. This is a very serious issue this morning. And then finally, Dr. Mukisa Kitui, who is the current Secretary General of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, who is former Kenyan Trade Minister. He had declared that, that was a few years ago during a conference in Nairobi, the EPAs make concessions to Europe more than we are making to the rest of the world trade, the world in the WTO Doha round. To make poverty history, you have to also make EPAs history. I think the situation of EPAs has been hunting us, so we cannot move beyond that perspective. The context of my presentation is that the economic growth and development of ACP states is heavily dependent upon the enhanced, effective, and more qualitative integration into the global trading system beyond their access to the EU market. So the final objective is not to access the EU market, but to facilitate the integration into the global market. The main formidable challenges entail the current marginalization of ACP states in the global trade. Most of ACP states are faced with inherent structural and infrastructural constraints. Most depend on commodity exports and to traditional trading partners. ACP countries are convinced that their development promise and new trade opportunities of the WTO Doha round have dissipated with uncertainties unfolding from the EPA's implementation. Industrialization has become another issue, emerging issue. So all the benefits from the WTO development agenda have been erased by the negotiation. Now the background is that for the purpose of EPA's negotiation, the 5 African regional groups were organized as follows: the West Africa ECOWAS, then Central Africa, East African Community, Eastern and Southern Africa, and then Southern African Development Community. This has been repeated all the time by the presenters who came before me. As per the negotiations rules, adopted by the EU and the EPAs. Each EPA requires the signature of all the contracting parties in each region before it can be ratified. This is why they are talking about the interim EPA. It's not definitive because some countries have refused or are unable to ratify or even to sign anything. Without the endorsement of all the parties to an EPA, it is legally, effectively dead, as it won't enter into force. This has a critical impact on the regional integration agenda. The key issues now, the shifting strategy approaches and interests, which are the gradual enlargement of the EU and admission of new members, has drastically changed the EU attitude towards the ACP countries. Some new countries which were admitted during the waves of admission to enlargement of the European Union did not have any colonial links with Africa. So they are no longer interested in having preferential maybe market access or trade with Africa. So we have to recognize that this is one of the issues of shifting strategy approaches. There are also emerging competing powers, namely China, India, and now the BRICS. While the reality of the outcome from the EU-British ongoing negotiation on Brexit sets in, the probability of EPA's renegotiation process becomes a heated debate. I think we have had some exchange on this, something that there will never be a renegotiation, but legally speaking, when you are doing consultations in provision for the eventual Brexit outcome, that means you are preparing for a new legal framework, which is different from the one which is now in existence. And I believe that is the process of renegotiation, where the renegotiation has started under the tables, but will become official once the deadline of March 2019 happens. As the fourth industrialization becomes a key mantra for the future of trade partnership worldwide, African LDCs countries appear more interested in new, innovative global relations and solutions which can recognize the value of natural assets and development based the relationship-based, the development-based economic partnership. Africa needs to value its natural resources. So now this is the map of the ACP states, 17 in total. Of course, you have the Caribbean group in the Pacific, and the rest, the majority of them are from Africa. Now, the chapter on the landscape of regional integration in Eastern and Southern Africa, this is, I'm trying to focus on my topic. I only mentioned the RECs as recognized by the African Union. The African Union roadmap has recognized 8 regional economic communities as pillars of the African continental integration. This is the first step of the roadmap. The Arab Maghreb Union, the Economic Community of West African States, the East African Community, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the Southern Africa Development, SADC, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, the Economic Community of Central African States, ECCAS, and then the Community of Sahel States, which encompasses some of the ECOWAS and IGAD and even Arab Maghreb Union states. Basically, when we are talking about the spaghetti bowl, is that this, you can see the overlapping configuration of regional integration. Regionalism, it's another topic we cannot exhaust today. But this is one of the challenges of the negotiations, because the EPAs are based on the regional economic communities blocks. And within the Eastern and Southern African regional economic communities, we have the Common Monetary Agreement, which is not part of the pillars recognized by the African Union. Then we have COMESA, which is one of the tripartite free trade agreement signatories. The East African Community, which is a common market, but also one of the signatories of the tripartite free trade agreement. The IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is a free trade area. And then the Indian Ocean Commission, which is a free trade area. SECU, Southern African Customs Union, this is the oldest custom union in the world. And then SADC, the Southern African Development Community, which is one of the signatories to the tripartite free trade agreement within Eastern and Southern Africa. Now, the overlapping issue is even complicated with this tripartite bloc, which is now entails maybe the interests of 26 countries, African countries, and is probably the largest free trade agreement maybe area on the continent. Now, we have to recognize the EPA's outlook is a mismatch of the existing regional economic communities. I think we have been discussing this yesterday and this morning. The current EPA's negotiation have led to a deep mismatch as compared with the existing African Union recognized rates, thus leading to a disruption of the regional integration agenda. Here we're talking about, we have a question, do EPAs support a regional integration agenda? If the answer is yes, then that's good, we move ahead. But if the answer is no, which is the case now, then we have to go back to the drawing board. Diverging interests among the EPAs countries, low development countries and non-LDCs on key priorities cannot enable a development-led agenda to achieve their expectations as per the current multilateral-based and the WTO-led order. Actually, when we talk about LDCs, this morning we had one of the presenters talking about the category by the World Bank. Like Angola, no one is talking about Angola being an LDC, because not that they have reached the level to qualify for a developed country like South Africa or Kenya, but they told the World Bank, we don't want you to call us LDC. We are not an LDC. We decide to be what we want, but they are still an LDC. The African countries in the Eastern and Southern African region have expressed strong concerns which are not being fulfilled by the current EPA's outcomes. The resulting outcome is a recipe for greater failures. If not addressed during the final negotiation of the EPA's framework, the Brexit process might even deepen this. Basically, this is the map of the African EPA's regions. Now, the importance, we cannot deny that EPAs are not important for Eastern and Southern Africa. So let me just go. The key objectives of the EPAs is just to provide a means for continued duty-free, quota-free market access into the EU to the African, Caribbean, Pacific SP groups of countries consistent with the parties' obligation under the rules of the WTO organization. EPAs are important for our countries because they can currently obtain duty-free, quota-free access consistent with WTO rules. But the European Union contends that the only way to continue to provide such access to developing countries like Kenya, South Africa, which are not LDCs, is to enter into reciprocal EPAs where both parties undertake to liberalize and reduce the import tariffs under the GATT Article 24. Now, there is a hot issues we raised yesterday. Who are the parties to the EPS? The preamble to the frameworks, the model frameworks for the EPS, they list always the 28 EU member states individually, and then the EU itself as a signatory to the EPA agreement. And then the territorial application clause clarifies that the EPA agreement shall apply only to territories where the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of European Union apply. Therefore, when and if the UK ceases to be a member of the EU, both treaties will no longer apply to the UK, and consequently, the EU EPAs will no longer be applicable to the territory of the UK. This is where we say that what will come afterwards will be a renegotiated framework. Then the preamble to the EPA lists the other contracting parties according to their regions, the individual countries, but the regional blocs are not parties to the EPAs, like the East African Community, the Eastern and Southern African COMESA region, some of them have left, and even SADC. Like SADC as an institution, which is a corporate institution, is not a signatory to the EPA of SADC with you, which brings into question, how do you implement such an agreement which the regional bloc is not part to? A close reading of the preamble suggests that the EAC and SADC or COMESA in their institutional capacity are not signatories to the EPAs. Instead, each individual bloc partner state is and EC, the individual states are signatories only. Any part can withdraw from the EPA agreement anytime, even after ratification of the EPA. Now, mapping the gaps in the EPA's framework for African development. There is a strong mismatch between EPAs and RECs, a common perception as explained by many countries, and even today, where the Réunion and Mauritius, Madagascar, there is little coherence between the EPA agenda and the regional integration process in Africa. One particular concern has been that countries in the same economic region might liberalize different baskets of products and so then create new barriers to intra-regional trade in order to avoid trade deflection, which is not going to facilitate the regional integration agenda. This concern has been vindicated by the interim EPA that have been agreed, namely the East African Community. And why are the African countries opposed to the economic partnership agreements? This morning, Mr. Bruno Milo, he raised that échec du volet de développement et intégration régionale des accords de partenariat économique. That's just very simple. To summarize the situation, they did not meet the expectations. And then now the Brexit and the Trojan horse syndrome. African opposition to EPAs with the EU has been based on the perceived overall negative impact of the EPAs on the development prospects of the country. The key objective of the EU partnership agreements, as identified in the Cotonou Agreement of 2000, is to help Africa development efforts. The ongoing EPA negotiations have failed to sustain the regional and continental integration agenda and specific expectation, like the IOC countries. The reluctance to the pacta sunt servanda, for lawyers, pacta sunt servanda is that agreements need to be respected. Only in the case of the East African Community have all members joined the EPA and accepted identical liberalization schedules, but still Tanzania is still reluctant to ratify it. And these are implemented fully, and in a timely way, economic integration will have been reinforced in that sub-region. Those Eastern and Southern African countries and the 5 Southern African Development Community subgroups, SADC minus states, that have initialed have done so to single agreements, but there is considerable dissimilarity in the country liberalization schedules and exclusion basket. This is the example between SADC countries, South Africa, BNLs, this is Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and Switzerland, and then Mozambique. Now, there is uncertainty over the Brexit negotiations, outcome, and subsequent consultation, eventual negotiation. I hope that the leader of the opposition in the UK is right. Maybe the Conservatives will keep pushing for a new referendum, which is very difficult because the Prime Minister also is decided to go ahead. And again, sorry, this is not a repeat. The Trojan horse syndrome was based on the allegation from de Gaulle, General de Gaulle, who used to say that the British joining the European Union will be like a Trojan horse coming on behalf of the Americans to spoil the development of the European Union. Basically, they were afraid that the euro will be stronger than the dollar. And then, basically, this is what has proved that to be the outcome. Britain became a member of the EC through a treaty of accession signed in Brussels in January 72 and came into force in January 73, together with Denmark. And then and Iran, the Treaty Protocol 22 allowed Commonwealth LDC territories to come in as associable into preferential access to EEC, pushing further to the creation of the SCP group. Now, finally, harnessing APE's benefits for deeper integration in the Eastern and Southern Africa. There are benefits, real benefits for, I think this is a summary of what has been said: preferential market, duty-free, quota-free access, better and clear rule of origin provision, like in SADC has always been struggling with its the rules of origin. Implementation has been very complicated, but with the TFTA, they hoped that it will become easier, but within the EPS it becomes easier. And there is a progressive liberalization and removal of trade barriers within a reasonable timelines, because if we had not benefited from the WTO enabling cause, some countries will have very difficult to maybe to adhere to the deadline. Then the safeguard measures, provisions. These are benefits for the EPS, and access to EDF funding for specific projects and the potential for enhanced EU SCP trade exchange. We have had numbers in growth of intra-regional and international trade to Europe imports and as well as exports. And then preferential treatment for ADCs and nascent industry protection within the SCP states. Then I have highlighted the key priorities sectors. Unfortunately, the time is coming out, but we need to look ahead. I have highlighted the promotion of regional tech hubs for the implementation of intra-regional trade and export-based industries, like in agriculture, fisheries, manufacture, investment in the blue economy development, transfer of technology and know-how from the EU-developed countries to African SCPs, and then the necessity to enhance support for entrepreneurship and local innovation, community-based support services, and then priorities support for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and then the implementation of the tripartite FTA. In conclusion, my concluding remarks are that the EU-SCP relation cannot effectively advance the notion of global free trade if the concept is not coupled with the requirements of human development and social responsibility. Those who have been raising the issue of Chinese not respecting human rights, whatever, there are some values which were enshrined in the European Union and based on the Cotonou Agreement. You cannot change that. We have to keep on repeating that. And the European model combines market economy and social responsibility. The trade agenda encompassing the EU and the ACP states need to keep these basic values to gain legitimacy through the recognition of human and social development. Actually, the parliament and local population should be involved to avoid that top-down process. We have to involve all the populations in even within the ratification process, because most of the governments come and go, but these EPAs, they will stay forever, and they entail some commitments from the people from different countries. The private market actors are the key drivers of the free trade and policy frameworks and regulatory mechanisms. They need to ensure human dignity and social cohesion. In the modern knowledge-based and globalized economy, innovation and technology are main key contributing factors to economic development. Innovation and technology-led societies create more jobs, attract foreign currencies, investment, and are able to build new infrastructure. So the EU ACP frameworks need to emphasize more this innovation and technology dimension, more than they're doing now, to support and enhance research-focused industry and academic partnership. The contribution to the academic community, to the industry is very important. And then to development of intellectual property rights for trade development in African ACP beneficial states. The EU needs to build new trade relationship. We need to move away from this past dimension of EPAs and have a new vision, long-term vision. We cannot forget the Lomé, Cotonou, and EPAs, which have been of a good history of partnership, but we have failed to achieve the expected outcome. Then the way forward is that the new EU-Africa, we propose that they should have developed new states partnership based on a shifting of paradigm over a long-term perspective towards the 2060 African Union vision in a multipolar world trade environment, and we should mature into a fully-fledged multi-regional association based on a comprehensive, innovative, and attractive agenda encompassing development issues. And I think Trudy has raised that issue as well. Then we need to promote innovative solutions and industrial development. As we prepare to embrace the fourth industrial revolution, the EU-Africa ACP states partnership need to focus on innovation and activate existing potential in the transformation of natural resources, which have been really considerable during the last decade. The engagement with the business communities and to be instrumental in promoting investment, technology transfer solutions, such as the futurist reverse innovation concept. These are my recommendations, finally, which is a summary of what I said in a few conclusions. And I have put some references for those who like to know. I realize that some of including the representative of the European Union, they were skeptical about our analysis of the situation on the renegotiation. All these documents, they point to the situation we have been defending, and unfortunately we cannot raise these issues within 30 minutes only. These are very important issues which need more, maybe, attention, and thank you very much for your attention. Obrigado, asante sana. My name is Charles Edward Minega from the Douala Mondial University in Maputo, and then I hope that we shall meet again. Thank you very much.